I used to think family was supposed to be your safe haven, the people who would catch you when you fell and lift you up when the world tried to tear you down. I was 23 years old when I learned that sometimes the people who share your blood can be the cruelest of all, and sometimes the only way to protect yourself is to become someone they never saw coming. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how my own family's laughter at my tears became the catalyst for their complete destruction. If you've ever felt powerless against people who were supposed to love you, if you've ever been dismissed or humiliated by those closest to you, then maybe you'll understand why I did what I did, and maybe, just maybe, you'll tell me in the comments below whether you think I went too far. It all started 3 years ago at my grandmother's funeral. Grandma Rose had been my anchor, the only person in my family who truly saw me and loved me unconditionally. She was 87 when she passed, and I was devastated. I mean completely, utterly broken. She had raised me more than my own parents ever did, teaching me how to bake her famous apple pies, listening to my teenage heartbreaks, and always believing in my dreams of becoming a writer when everyone else called it impractical. The funeral was held on a gray October morning in our small town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania. The whole extended family was there, cousins I hadn't seen in years, aunts and uncles who barely acknowledged my existence, and of course, my immediate family, my parents, David and Linda, my older brother Marcus, and my younger sister Jessica, the people who should have been my support system but had somehow become my greatest source of pain. I was sitting in the front pew, trying to hold myself together, as the pastor spoke about Grandma Rose's life of service and love. The tears were flowing freely down my cheeks, and I didn't care who saw them. This woman had been everything to me, and now she was gone forever. I felt this crushing weight in my chest, like someone had reached inside and squeezed my heart until I couldn't breathe properly. That's when I heard it. The snickering, quiet at first, then growing bolder. I turned around and saw my brother Marcus trying to suppress his laughter, his shoulders shaking with the effort. Jessica was covering her mouth with her hand, but I could see the amusement in her eyes. Even my parents were exchanging those looks, the kind that said they thought I was being dramatic, making a scene. "She's such a crybaby," I heard Jessica whisper to Marcus, loud enough for me to catch every word. "It's embarrassing. People are staring." Marcus nodded and added, "She always has to make everything about her. Even Grandma's funeral becomes the Sarah show." I felt my face burn with shame and anger. Here I was, grieving the loss of the most important person in my life, and my own family was mocking me for it. The pastor was still speaking, but I couldn't hear his words anymore. All I could hear was the sound of their barely contained laughter, mixing with my sobs. My mother leaned over and hissed in my ear, "Pull yourself together, Sarah. You're 23 years old, not 13. People are starting to notice." That was the moment something inside me broke. Not just broke, but shattered into a million pieces that I knew I'd never be able to put back together the same way. The people who were supposed to comfort me in my darkest hour were instead humiliating me, treating my grief like it was some kind of performance I was putting on for attention. After the service, during the reception at the church hall, the mockery continued. Family members would approach me with fake sympathy, saying things like, "Oh, Sarah's taking it so hard," while exchanging meaningful glances with each other. My cousin Tommy actually had the audacity to pat me on the head like I was a child, having a tantrum and say, There, maybe you should save some tears for when something really sad happens." I excused myself and went to the bathroom, where I locked myself in a stall and sobbed until my chest ached. That's where I made a promise to myself, a promise that would change everything. I swore that I would never again give these people the power to make me feel small and worthless. I would become someone they couldn't dismiss, someone they couldn't laugh at, someone they would have to respect whether they wanted to or not. The months that followed were the darkest of my life, but also the most transformative. I threw myself into my work with a vengeance. I had been working as a freelance writer, barely making ends meet, taking on whatever projects I could find just to pay my bills. But now I had a different kind of motivation. I wasn't just writing to survive anymore. I was writing to prove them all wrong. I started a blog called The Invisible Daughter, where I wrote about growing up in a family that never quite saw me, never quite valued me the way they did my siblings. The posts were raw, honest, and deeply personal. I wrote about the Christmas mornings where Marcus and Jessica got the expensive gifts while I got practical things like socks and school supplies. I wrote about the family photos where I was always positioned slightly apart from the others, like an afterthought. I wrote about the countless times my achievements were downplayed while theirs were celebrated. But here's the thing about pain: if you channel it correctly, it can become the most powerful fuel you've ever known. My blog started gaining traction. People were responding to my stories, sharing their own experiences of family rejection and emotional neglect. Within 6 months, I had thousands of followers. Within a year, I had book agents reaching out to me. My family, meanwhile, continued to treat me like the family disappointment. They would gather for holidays and birthdays, sometimes forgetting to invite me altogether. When I did show up, they would make comments about my little writing hobby and ask when I was going to get a real job. Marcus had become a successful insurance agent. Jessica was finishing her nursing degree, and I was still just Sarah, the sensitive one, who cried too much and lived in a fantasy world of words. What they didn't know was that my fantasy world was about to become very real and very profitable. The book deal came through on a Tuesday morning in April, almost exactly 18 months after Grandma Rose's funeral. The publisher offered me a 6-figure advance for my memoir, Invisible, Growing Up Unseen in Plain Sight. I stared at the email for a full 10 minutes, reading it over and over again, making sure it was real. This wasn't just validation of my writing, it was vindication of everything I had been feeling for years. But I didn't tell my family right away. I had learned to be strategic about when and how I shared information with them. Instead, I used the advance money to quietly transform my life. I moved out of my tiny studio apartment and into a beautiful 2-bedroom place across town. I bought a car that actually started every time I turned the key. I invested in a professional wardrobe and started taking care of myself in ways I never had before. The book came out the following spring, and it was like watching a miracle unfold. The reviews were incredible. Readers were connecting with my story in ways I had never imagined possible. I started getting invited to podcasts, literary events, and book signings. Major publications wanted to interview me about family dynamics and emotional resilience. My family still had no idea what was happening. I had kept my writing life completely separate from them, using a pen name for my blog and book. As far as they knew, I was still struggling financially, still the family failure who couldn't get her life together. That summer, my cousin Amy was getting married, and the whole extended family was coming together for the celebration. It was going to be held at the Riverside Country Club, the fanciest venue in our area, and everyone was expected to dress to impress. I saw this as the perfect opportunity to make my grand reveal. I spent weeks planning my entrance. I bought a designer dress that cost more than my family thought I made in 3 months. I had my hair and makeup done professionally. I rented a luxury car for the weekend, something that would make a statement the moment. I pulled into the country club parking lot. The wedding reception was already in full swing when I arrived, fashionably late and looking like a completely different person than the sad, struggling Sarah they all knew. I could see heads turning as I walked into the ballroom, family members doing double takes, trying to figure out if that was really me. My mother was the first to approach me, her face a mixture of confusion and suspicion. "Sarah, my goodness, you look," she paused, clearly struggling to find words that wouldn't sound too complimentary, "different." I supplied with a smile that I had been practicing in the mirror. "Well, yes. How did you afford that dress? And your hair, it looks so, professional." Before I could answer, Marcus appeared at her elbow, his eyes narrowing as he took in my transformation. "What's going on, Sarah? Did you finally find some rich guy to take care of you?" The condescension in his voice was exactly what I had been expecting, and exactly what I needed to fuel what came next. I pulled out my phone and showed them a photo from my recent appearance on a popular morning talk show, where I had been interviewed as an up-and-coming author to watch. "Actually," I said, keeping my voice calm and measured, "I've been taking care of myself quite well, thank you." Marcus stared at the photo, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Is this real? When did this happen?" "Oh, it's been happening for quite a while now. My book has been on the bestseller list for 6 weeks. I've got 3 more book deals in the works, and Hollywood is interested in the film rights." I said this all very casually, like I was discussing the weather. By now, Jessica had joined our little group, along with several cousins and family friends. Word was spreading quickly through the reception that something big was happening. I could see people gathering around us, straining to hear what was being said. "Your book," my father had appeared, looking skeptical. What book? I handed him a copy that I had brought specifically for this moment. The cover featured a powerful image of a young woman standing alone, and the title, Invisible, Growing Up Unseen in Plain Sight, was emblazoned across the top in elegant lettering. Below that, in smaller but still prominent text, was my real name. That my father's face went through a series of expressions as he processed what he was seeing. Confusion gave way to recognition, which gave way to something that looked almost like fear. "This is about us," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. "This is about my experience growing up in this family," I corrected. My experience of feeling invisible, dismissed, and mocked by the people who were supposed to love and support me. The crowd around us had grown larger, and I could see several people pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming a dramatic family confrontation. My cousin Amy, the bride, was watching from across the room with a mixture of fascination and horror. Jessica grabbed the book from my father's hands and started flipping through it frantically. "You wrote about us, about our family, without asking, without telling us." "I wrote about my life," I said firmly. "My experiences, my feelings, my truth. Everything in that book is how I experienced growing up in this family." "But people will read this," Marcus said, his voice rising. "People will think we're terrible parents, terrible siblings. People will read about a family that laughed at their daughter's tears at her grandmother's funeral." I replied, my voice carrying clearly across the now silent ballroom. "They'll read about parents who consistently favored their other children and made one child feel like she was never good enough. They'll read about siblings who treated their sister's grief like entertainment." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the wheels turning in their heads as they realized the implications of what I had done. This wasn't just a book, it was a public reckoning. Their treatment of me was now documented and available for anyone to read and judge. My mother's face had gone pale. "Sarah, surely we can discuss this privately. This is Amy's wedding day. This isn't the place." "Oh, but this is exactly the place," I said, my voice getting stronger with each word. "This is where the whole family is gathered, where everyone can see and hear. Just like at Grandma Rose's funeral, when everyone could see and hear you all laughing at me while I grieved the woman who raised me." I turned to address the larger crowd that had gathered around us. "You know, it's funny how families work. For years, these people treated me like I was invisible, like my feelings didn't matter, like my dreams were just silly fantasies. They laughed when I cried, dismissed my achievements, and made me feel like I was the problem. But now that my silly fantasies have made me financially successful, now that my pain has resonated with millions of readers, suddenly I'm visible to them." The room was absolutely silent except for the quiet clicking of phone cameras capturing every moment. I could see my family members' faces cycling through emotions: anger, embarrassment, fear, and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. "The book has been optioned for a Netflix series," I continued, enjoying the way their faces changed with each revelation. "I've been invited to speak at conferences about family dynamics and emotional resilience. I have a literary agent, a publicist, and interviews scheduled with major publications for the next 6 months. All because I decided to stop being invisible and start telling my truth." Marcus stepped forward, his face red with anger. "You had no right to air our family's dirty laundry in public. This is betrayal, Sarah. This is revenge." "No, Marcus," I said, meeting his gaze steadily. "Revenge would be if I had made things up or exaggerated for effect. Everything in that book is true. Every incident I described, every dismissive comment, every moment of being made to feel small and worthless. If reading about your own behavior makes you uncomfortable, maybe you should examine why that is." Jessica was crying now, but not the kind of tears that had earned me mockery at the funeral. These were tears of anger and humiliation. "You've ruined us," she said. "People are going to read this and think we're monsters. People are going to read this and recognize their own experiences," I corrected. "The book has already sold over 100,000 copies. Do you know what that tells me? It tells me that there are a lot of people out there who know exactly what it feels like to be invisible in their own families." My father, who had been silent through most of this exchange, finally spoke up. "What do you want from us, Sarah? An apology? Money? What's this really about?" And that's when I realized that even now, even faced with the evidence of my success and the documentation of their behavior, they still didn't understand. They still thought this was about what I could get from them, rather than about what they had taken from me. I don't want anything from you, I said quietly. I wanted you to see me, to value me, to treat me like I mattered. I wanted that for 23 years, but I don't want it anymore. I've found people who see me and value me. I've built a career and a life that fulfills me. I've learned that sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family that's meant to support your dreams. I looked around at each of their faces, seeing them clearly perhaps for the first time in my life. They weren't the powerful figures who had once made me feel so small. They were just people, flawed and frightened people, who had never learned how to love someone who was different from them. The book isn't revenge, I said, my voice softening slightly. It's my story. It's my way of helping other people who feel invisible know that they're not alone. It's my way of turning pain into purpose. If that makes you uncomfortable, if that forces you to confront how you treated me, then maybe that's something you need to sit with. The bride, Amy, finally approached our group, clearly desperate to salvage what was left of her reception. Maybe we could take this conversation somewhere more private, she suggested hopefully. But I was done with private conversations with these people. I was done with hiding my success to make them comfortable. I was done with making myself smaller so they could feel bigger. There's nothing more to say, I told her gently. I came here to show them who I've become, and I've done that. I hope you have a beautiful marriage, Amy. I hope it's filled with the kind of love and support that everyone deserves. I turned to leave, but my mother grabbed my arm. Sarah, wait, we love you. We've always loved you. Maybe we didn't always show it the right way, but I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back up at her face. For a moment, I saw something there that might have been genuine regret, but it was too little, too late. I know you love me in your way, I said, but your way of loving me felt a lot like not being loved at all. I had to learn to love myself first before I could recognize what real love looks like. I gently removed her hand from my arm and walked toward the exit. Behind me, I could hear the murmur of voices as the family and wedding guests processed what they had just witnessed. I could hear Jessica crying and Marcus arguing with my father about something. But for the first time in my life, their drama wasn't my drama. Their emotions weren't my responsibility. As I reached the door, I turned back one more time. The crowd was dispersing, but my family was still standing there in a tight cluster, looking lost and confused. They looked smaller, somehow, diminished. Not because I had set out to diminish them, but because I had finally stopped allowing them to diminish me. If anyone wants to share their own story about feeling invisible in their families, I'd love to hear from you in the comments, I said, addressing the people who were still recording with their phones. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is refuse to stay invisible. I walked out of that ballroom and into my new life, leaving behind the family that had never quite known what to do with me. The book went on to become a bestseller. The Netflix series is currently in production, and I've written 2 more books since then. I speak at conferences and universities about resilience, authenticity, and the power of telling your truth. My family has tried to reach out several times. Since that day, my mother sends cards on my birthday and holidays. Jessica has left voicemails apologizing and asking if we can have coffee. Marcus has sent emails saying he's proud of what I've accomplished and wants to make things right. Part of me appreciates these gestures, but a bigger part of me recognizes them for what they are. Responses to my success rather than genuine acknowledgement of their behavior. They're not reaching out because they finally understand the pain they caused me. They're reaching out because I'm no longer the family failure they can dismiss. I'm now someone with influence and visibility, someone whose rejection of them reflects poorly on them. I've built a new family now, chosen from friends, mentors, and fellow writers who see and celebrate all parts of me. I've learned that love shouldn't be conditional on conforming to other people's expectations. Real love doesn't laugh at your tears or dismiss your dreams. Real love doesn't make you feel invisible. The little girl who cried at her grandmother's funeral, the one who was mocked for feeling too deeply, has grown into a woman who helps millions of people feel seen and understood. The pain that my family caused me became the foundation for work that has touched lives around the world. In a way, their cruelty became my greatest gift, though I wouldn't recommend that path to anyone. Sometimes people ask me if I regret writing the book, if I regret exposing my family's treatment of me so publicly. The answer is always no. Secrets protect the people who cause harm, not the people who are harmed. By telling my truth, I gave permission to countless others to tell theirs. To everyone watching this who has ever felt invisible, dismissed, or mocked by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally, I want you to know that your feelings are valid, your pain matters, your dreams are worth pursuing, even if the people around you don't understand them. Sometimes, the greatest act of self-love is refusing to stay small for other people's comfort. Subscribe if this story resonated with you, and please share your own experiences in the comments below. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is remind each other that we're not alone in our struggles. Sometimes being seen and heard by strangers is the first step toward building the family we actually deserve. Thought my family wanted me to stay invisible, to keep quiet about their treatment of me, to protect their reputation at the expense of my truth. Instead, I chose to become so visible that they could never ignore me again. I chose to turn their laughter at my tears into a story that would make millions of people feel less alone in their pain. That's not revenge. That's justice. That's survival. That's the power of refusing to stay invisible when the people who should see you choose to look away.